My name is Tia Aagesen, and I'm an Elgin resident. My sustainable project is backyard chicken keeping. To be honest, I don't know that I learned it from any one singular place. My background is in culinary arts. I went to culinary school and worked for several years in the industry, so different elements of the of our food systems, like gardening and livestock keeping and all that sort of thing, were always interesting to me. So when I moved to Elgin, it was the first time that I had lived in a single resident house with my husband since I had left high school, for college and all of that. So it was the first opportunity that I really owned my own land and started researching what I needed to do, whether or not Elgin had any parameters for it. When I initially started looking into it, it explicitly stated within our ordinance that keeping livestock and inclusive of chickens was prohibited. Several other communities in the area did have ordinances at the time, so it was a relatively new idea for many of them. This was back in 2014, I believe, 2015. So from there, I started poking around and asking some city staff officials, what do I need to do in order to start this ball rolling if I want to change this, if I want to create an ordinance around this. And I was directed to the Sustainability Commission here in Elgin to sort of direct their attention at it, and that would be the first step in the process toward getting City Council's attention from there. I knew that grassroots was going to be an important element of this. I did know that it was going to be kind of a hard sell, so I wanted other people to be involved in it. So I created this group, and it grew for the most part organically. I did boost a couple of ads about it just to see if I couldn't get some people even from outside areas involved, people who are already keeping chickens in some of these other communities, which was great because they had their own background, their own stories to tell, and they sort of helped bolster our cause. Got the initial meeting with the commission and did a, I think, 15-20 minute presentation on chicken keeping. One thing I really focused on, which was really important to me at the time, was making sure that I approached this from a really rational standpoint. I knew that there was a lot of misinformation or confusing or scary topics related to chicken keeping, whether it was things around waste or smell or how disruptive it would be in the neighborhood, disease, all these different elements that were going to be arguments that would be brought up. I wanted to identify and establish some sort of counter argument to it, do the research, and really confront it head on. So I even went so far as to look into, and there's so many resources out there at this point, which was great. I even went so far as to look into, what the decibel level of a chicken clucking versus a dog barking, and understanding how many households are likely to even keep chickens and what the impact is going to be on 311, and really playing off of other ordinances that already existed and asking their code enforcement, how many issues have you had? And so we presented all of this information. It was great. We had wonderful community support. I think 15 or 20 people showed up to this commission meeting in support of this, and the commission recommended to City Council that they take a look at this. So from there, it was a few months. We had, I think, 4 or 5 months that went by before we ended up on a committee of the whole meeting agenda. And there was quite a long process in terms of, some public feedback. There were quite a few articles published in the paper that got people's attention. So there was a lot of online conversation and a lot of, I would say, general kind of pushback and concern. Not all of it was bad, just a lot of good questions. We spent a lot of time, and that was where I really appreciated this group. Everybody kind of pitched in, and we did a good job of making sure that we had the right information and that we were being positive and presenting that information to people so that they knew that we were also concerned about these things and addressing them. So we did have a few people that, said, oh, I didn't realize that, or I had always thought that, X, Y, Z. So we were able to, I think, calm some good fears and present ourselves in a very, sort of professional and, caring manner, that this was something we did care about. So from there, I think we finally got in front of City Council, and then there was this pilot program that was launched, and I believe it was only open to 12 or 15 households at the time. You had to apply for the permitting process, and you were only allowed, 4 hens, and there were parameters around what you could and couldn't do. You couldn't keep them in your house, you couldn't slaughter them or anything, too crazy like that. So we felt it was a realistic and reasonable ordinance that had been put together. So and then from there, I think people did a good job of listening to the ordinance, working with 311, and making sure that they were doing it the right way. People had fought really long. I mean, at this point, it had been about a year since we had started this process, so they they made a concerted effort to ensure that they were complying with all aspects of the law and keeping within those guidelines. So, certainly there were a few hiccups here and there where people, oh, I didn't realize that this was part of the code, or, there were people that didn't maybe read about the fact that you needed to apply, which I think is common for any sort of, change in an ordinance and that sort of thing. People get excited, but it was nothing to the detriment of the program. And from there we expanded, and I believe it was a year or two later they opened it up to more households, and I think we're up to probably 100 now. I believe, I can't remember the last time we checked, but so there's a pretty significant number of people that are engaged in this program and actively keeping chickens in Elgin. I actually found it far more enjoyable than I thought, and I think my husband's probably the better litmus test for that. He has kind of been my cheerleader in this process, but I think it was always like, this is your project, you go for it. But, we've both found it really rewarding, and for, several reasons. But first and foremost, chicken keeping, I think, has just been a surprisingly fun and enjoyable hobby, if you will. Chickens, we've learned, very much have personalities that are individual. They are, we have dogs and we have a cat, and chickens, we feel they're very much, I guess you could say, like your outdoor pets, more than just the same as your dogs might be. They recognize you. They are interested in what you're doing. They can be inquisitive and curious and funny. And then beyond that, all of the benefits that come with keeping them, certainly from a sustainability standpoint, we don't really throw away any food anymore. They eat just about anything, including, proteins like, meat and strangely chicken, all the way to, vegetable scraps. And, you've got some leftovers, or, something that is a little bit past what you might want to eat. Maybe it was a salad that has dressing on it. You can certainly give it to them, and they will be happy to eat it for you. Which in turn means that you end up getting, eggs out of the food that you couldn't eat. And they're good little egg layers, and they've been, really consistent in that aspect. So, just from a food scrap standpoint, I feel better about, the food that we ultimately can't consume. Food waste is a big concern, nationwide, worldwide. We throw away something like 40% of what we purchase never gets eaten. So I'm personally happy to take a chunk of that away because of those little creatures that are happy to eat whatever it is that we give them, and turn it into something positive. So that's been a good part of it. There are definitely benefits, and they look out for things like parasites. They'll eat ticks and bugs that are invasive to our backyard. So we're happy to have them. In terms of day to day, it really, they keep themselves for the most part. I let them out into their run in the mornings, and, just sort of some general maintenance of the coop if necessary, but generally not. They get fed once a day, check their water once a day, but for the most part, and then at night they typically put themselves to bed, and I shut the door on their coop, and they're all tucked in. So I would encourage people to definitely do your research up front. Look into the resources that are out there, whether they're online, make sure that they're sort of reputable. There's a lot of really good online forums to look into, and make sure that you understand all of the work and certainly financial obligation that goes into it before you get too invested and see those adorable little baby chicks down at Farm and Fleet and decide to come home with 4 of them. So that would be my biggest piece of advice. And then certainly, if you can, reach out to people here in Elgin, because they understand the process and understand, what goes into it, and making sure that you're following the right guidelines and that you're adhering to the rules. You could contact either the Sustainability Commission, and they may have some resources and some people to reach out to, or City Council, or I'm sorry, City Hall may also have, through the 311 department may have some resources as well. So it's been a great community of people. They tend to want to help other people get involved. I think it was interesting to me, and I even learned a lot along the way, that, we as city folk don't really know a whole lot about what goes on, with our food systems. So there's a lot to learn. A lot of people, I still get questions pretty frequently about, well, don't you need a rooster in order to have eggs? Well, no, you don't. You can have, 4 hens and get as many eggs as you want. Certain breeds and most chickens lay eggs only for a few years of their lifespan, so that's something to consider. That you're not going to have eggs for the entire, length of a chicken's life. Do they lay eggs in the winter? Yes, they do. We have a heat lamp that we turn on that also provides some extra, quote unquote, daylight hours for them, so that they will keep laying. They do, they kind of back off their laying a bit during the colder winter months, but for the most part, they're pretty hardy animals. They don't require a whole lot of heat or warmth, all year long. They do pretty well as long as it's just above freezing. So they can handle it pretty well on their own. So just a few minor measures can really, take care of whatever weather we might experience here in the Elgin area. I think the biggest part of this project that has been most important to me is reinforcing the connection of people and their food. We live in a time when chicken nuggets are normal, and we don't see the animals that our food comes from every single day. We don't see the plants that our food comes from every single day, and having that more immediate connection, I think, particularly for kids, is important. It teaches you a lot of value in the food system, and you understand intrinsically when you finally get that first egg how much work and time and energy and resources went into it. And it teaches you to value that much more. So you're going to be less willing to throw something away. You're going to be more willing to fight for that, to keep it around. So I think that is my goal for everyone that gets involved in this, to understand that, to learn from it, and to carry that with them. This was an interesting thing that the city decided to allow us to do, and I think it's been a really interesting step in direction of sustainability. Much like gardening is important to a lot of people, I think this follows the same.